Hello, everyone. My name is Roy Weinstock. I'm an MBA student at MIT Sloan. It's my pleasure to introduce you the panel Mastering the Mind, the Psychology of Winning. Our panelists are Sian Beilock, President of Dartmouth, Alison Pfister, VP of Team Operations and Organizational Growth at Boston Celtics, and Steve Magness, author and expert on athletic performance. Our panel will be moderated by Lauren Rosen, sideline reporter of Los Angeles Clippers. And the panel will run for 40 minutes, and we'll leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Please submit questions through the Cadence app. And with that, I'll turn it to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Roy. So great to be here with you all. I hope we're able to put something together that's inspiring, exciting, surprising. What we have here, though, for sure, are 3 super successful individuals that I have found inspiring just in my research process. But what we've also learned is that these are people that have had some formative failures. And I think in these settings, we probably don't talk nearly enough about how much failure can eventually impact success. So as a little icebreaker, we're going to go around quickly and talk about a failure that impacted life as it has become today. Steve, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. I think failure is what I'm world class at. But I'm really good at a specific kind of failure, which is like getting really freaking close and then falling short, so it hurts really a lot. And I'll give a couple of quick examples and then give my formative failure. First off, I spent a number of years coaching at the University of Houston, working with Carl Lewis. Consider this. At 3 consecutive NCAA championships, we got 3rd, 2nd, and 3rd, and missed winning by a couple points every time. I'm an author. I've sold over 1 million books, made every bestseller list except for the one that is important. New York Times missed it a couple times by literally a couple dozen books. But I think what really defines this and shows it is in my athletic career. So in high school, I was a phenom runner. I was #1 in the nation in the mile my senior year of high school, 6th fastest US miler in high school in history, 3rd fastest in the world for high schoolers at that year, and ran a 4:01 mile, 4 minutes and 1 second. And if you know anything about track and field, the only thing that matters is breaking the 4-minute barrier. You want to be alongside Roger Bannister. Well, when I ran that in high school, I was running in professional meets, and I said, Olympics, this is where I'm going. The long story short is I never got better. I ran between 4:01 and 4:04 probably 20 times and never, ever got that final, literally 1.03 seconds faster. And for a while, that really bothered me. But I don't think I'd be sitting here on this stage if I would have had a 350-something in front of my name, because that failure, that experiencing that, is what pushed me into the field that I'm in now. And I think that's what often we see in life, is that our failures, well, they really freaking suck in the moment. They become the fuel for the next thing.
Yeah, I would say too that you have to, when you think about failure, you have to reframe and envision it as an opportunity for growth. I think we've all had, personal failures. I think mine probably helped position me and, mentally test me the most. I'm on my 3rd and final marriage. I don't know if anybody's ever been divorced, but when you think about divorce, you think about failure. But for me, it's an opportunity to find the love of my life. But from a professional standpoint, the Celtics finally got over the hump and won the title last year. The previous years, we'd been to the Eastern Conference Finals, been to the finals a couple times, and for us, it wasn't about failure, although for many it was failure when you don't win. It's about the process of what you learn throughout those moments of adversity. So.
Well, right now, I am president of Dartmouth, one of the best Ivy League universities in the world, but I made my career studying performance under stress. I actually studied choking under pressure. I wrote a book called Choke, And I have that career because in high school, I was playing soccer in the Olympic development program. I was a goalie, and I had the worst game of my life while the national coach was standing behind the goal. And I started wondering why I sometimes perform poorly when I wanted to perform at my best. It's kind of counterintuitive. And so I see my whole career working with athletes, CEOs, trying to understand the neuroscience behind what's happening under pressure because of that pivotal failure.
I didn't know this was a loser panel, though, to be honest. I was like, I'm kind of in that field.
When we think about success and performance, Steve likes to say that performance is performance. And I want to sort of start there because hopefully we can find a midpoint among everybody in this room, whether you're in sports, whether you're an executive, a president of an organization, or aspiring to be any of those things. The failure is going to come. The need to perform under pressure is also going to come. So what have you found, Steve, in that research that proves that whether you're performing on the NBA stage or in a boardroom, that performance is performance and preparation is preparation?
Yeah, I think what often happens is we get locked in our silos. So all of us come from a sporting background, and we think, okay, this only occurs when we play soccer or step up to the starting line or onto the court. Like, this is specific to us. But that's not the case, because if you look at it, like, the stress, the pressure, like, that evolved not from playing sports. It's like to help us deal with challenges, or way back in the day, if a lion or tiger or snake came across us, it manifests in that arena. And where this really clicked for me is, I remember several years ago when I was first getting into my writing career, I had the fortune of sitting down and talking to a guy named Matt Billingsley, who is a long-term drummer for Taylor Swift. And I'm like, how do you get ready for being on stage in front of all these people and like not messing up, because like she might kill you if you mess up? And he starts taking me through his routine and his mental prep, and I know nothing about music or drumming whatsoever, but all I could think about was like, this is the same thing I do preparing for a race. And I think that's the commonality we've all seen, is whether it's standing up here on stage or, being an executive or getting ready for a sport, the same basic underlying ingredients apply.
Yeah, I would just add, from studying it from a neuroscience perspective, your brain doesn't care if you're holding a pencil in your hand to take a test or a golf club. How the mechanisms work when we're preparing or feeling stress, and that moment where we're sitting waiting for the big event, when we're doing the what ifs, that doesn't matter what we're about to do. It's all the same. And it's one of the things that I love about studying sports and then running a big organization, is that so many of the lessons apply to what I do with teams. And I think most organizations would be better off if they turned more to sports for lessons for how to run it. But we do know that athletes are overrepresented in high levels of organizations. And what I tell a lot of our athletes at Dartmouth, who are amazing Ivy League athletes, most of them won't be professional athletes, is that we're training them to be athletes in their life.
So speaking of athletes in high-level organizations now, for those that don't know, Allison is a local legend. She played at Harvard, then she had a 2 decades long professional career as a basketball player. 3?
Seasoned, yeah. No, 2.
Oh, okay. I was like, you're not old enough
well
to have
preserved.
3 decades. Stop that. So Allison is someone that I admire personally, just as a woman in sports, someone that's sort of trailblazing in our space. But I'm curious, because President Beilock alluded to it, being an athlete and now being in a high-pressure executive role, where do you see the things that you learned in your pro career now showing up as you lead other pros?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think I can even go back further than, my professional career to really call upon the things that I'm using now. It's the resilience testing over and over and over again, whether it was, I don't know, being the only person of color on, my team at Harvard, or being the only English speaker and person of color on many, many teams abroad in many, many different countries, having to learn different languages, being in a corporate environment after having never had, corporate experience, being in a male-dominated space. It's just resilience testing over and over and over again, and I see that is something that is directly applicable to the work that I do now with our team, our organization. It's just repetition after repetition of practice.
Resilience testing, is that a phrase, I saw you nodding, President Beilock, when you talk about avoiding choking or resilience against perhaps choking, how does that theory compute sort of for folks that maybe haven't studied it?
Yeah, I mean, our research and that of my peers shows one of the best ways to get used to high pressure situations is to put yourself in them. And I think we often think of being uncomfortable as a negative sign, but it's actually how you learn. At Dartmouth, we talk about it not as creating in our classrooms safe spaces, but brave spaces where you feel like you can give a point of view, where people can push at each other. And that idea that having those uncomfortable feelings makes for better learning and performance is well studied and supported in psychology. We talk about it when we talk about deliberate practice, hard practice that doesn't always feel good to get to the next level. And so I think about it as creating these brave spaces where you're always putting yourself in those challenging situations and learning that you, even if you don't always feel okay in the moment, it's how you actually get better and succeed.
And I think that's why athletes are overrepresented, because in our modern world, like, where's one space where you can go towards that discomfort and you're almost forced to in a controlled, relatively safe space, which is sport. And I think this is why, whether we look at youth sports or high school or college or professional, it provides this perfect spot where it's like, hey, the point is to go towards the discomfort. It's to understand that we're probably going to fail, and that failure is going to hit us smack in the face, and we're going to have to deal with it and navigate it. We can't hide from it. And I think, sadly, in a lot of other parts in our world, we kind of like go towards avoidance. And what we need to do is go towards that growth space.
I totally agree. And actually, there's research that suggests in the political sphere that when you tell someone that being uncomfortable is a sign of learning, you'll get Democrats spending more time reading Fox News than they would if they didn't hear that being uncomfortable is a sign of learning, and you get Republicans spending more time reading the New York Times. And so the idea that it's part of what sports is, that you have that discomfort as a way to go forward, we could use that in a lot of spaces to maybe reduce some of the polarization we're seeing in our country.
Yeah, I'm curious. Allison's wearing her championship ring, but
Yeah, it was blinding me.
We don't have that many opportunities to, put
no,
it out
as
there.
you should.
So
I love
If
it.
I had one, I'd wear it. So what I'm curious when we talk about sort of this ability to withstand failure, you were part of plenty of seasons. Ultimately, as is the case in any sports league, only one team gets to win the title every year, right? So in the NBA, in our space, 29 teams fail every year. So that's what I was going to say. How do you couch those failures, those sort of intentional exposure to failure, in order to build up to the experience that you had? Which of them maybe stand out along the way to finding the ultimate success?
Sheesh. It's super painful it really underscores the importance of, testing yourself and putting yourself in the uncomfortable spaces, because, losing after having, run the race as perfectly as you can be devastating. And so, it's so hard to say. I personally don't even entertain the word failure, because it's an opportunity for me to reflect and to grow and to identify ways where you can glean some type of competitive advantage so that you can be a little bit better the next year. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to be. We even coined the phrase "even better." Like we do the postmortem and look at the past season and see where we can improve. So I don't know. For me, all I know, having trained many years as an athlete, having lived in adversity, having played the game, it's the adversity. You chase the adversity almost.
Steve, you teach people sort of in one-on-one settings still when you're coaching how to overcome failure, how to optimize performance. When you're working with people sort of one-on-one, maybe in a more private space as opposed to what Allison has done that was so public, what do you find with people one-on-one that are working through failure?
Yeah, I mean, I think Allison is spot on. I think a lot of it is the story we weave and tell ourselves in our head. And what you see is resilient people are really good at figuring out how to tell good stories. And there's research on this by McAdams and Bauer that found that, when we tell what's called redemption stories, meaning like we weave it into a spot where we're taking this thing and look at it towards growth, and also have some, components of like agency, meaning some like I have control over this, I can do something about this. We tend to be more resilient. So in a one-on-one space, I always kind of look at it as like, first off, what story are you telling yourself about this? Allison said it perfectly. In her mind, that's like not failure. That's one way to deal with it. I remember sitting on this this panel a couple years ago with Sue Bird, and they asked her, have you choked or failed? And she said, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said, like, I've missed a lot of shots. And that simple language in reframing, like, is super powerful. And I think we need to like help people understand how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we are the longest conversation we're ever going to have is with ourselves. And that's a really powerful conversation. And we are often so mean to ourselves relative to how we would be to someone else as we're building them up. We've all had those moments where we berate ourselves or dwell. There's psychology research talking about this effect of spotlighting, where we focus on what we did wrong when most people in reality are paying attention to themselves so they don't notice it. But we can really change that own story, and that's a really powerful one.
He brings up a very good point about these moments of self-talk and how we frame this failure. I recall a game this season. My daughter is a collegiate player, and she missed 3 free throws at the end of the game to tie the game. That, for me, my conversation with her directly, and as I was digesting the game, it wasn't about those 3 free throws. It was about a gajillion other instances within the game that could have contributed to the win or to the loss. But seizing that moment as a teaching moment and calling out those moments.
Absolutely. I mean, I got my career started with coaching, and what I realized is if you went in as the coach and said like, let's focus on those 3 free throws you missed, what it does is it almost like ingrains like, oh my gosh, that really sucked. This is almost like a traumatizing experience. I'm gonna just like panic and avoid this situation in the future instead of like focusing on the things that I did well, how can I improve? So it's not like this huge traumatizing event of like, I messed up. And I mean, I remember experiencing this as an athlete is, when I was running, a 4-minute mile is like the simplest math you can do, 4 laps, 60 seconds or under, which is great. But if you've come really close and missed all the time, what tended to happen is like, every time I came by, I'd be like, okay, am I still on pace? Am I still under? And instead of being something that motivated me towards it, it almost became this trauma of like, oh, I'm half a second off, it's over, done, and my brain just like shuts down and goes into that negative spiral. And I think that's what, as coaches or athletes, like we've got to make sure that like our inner self-talk doesn't spiral towards that.
And there's really interesting neuroscience data, some of it that we've done ourselves, and we can't have people running miles or playing basketball in an MRI scanner, but we can have them doing things that are really scary, like math for a lot of people. And it's true, there's a whole other talk. You don't hear people bragging about not being reading people, but they brag about not being math people, which we have to fix. But what we show is that your brain changes as a function of whether you are trying to avoid losing or trying to achieve something. And when you're trying to avoid it and you're focused on the negative, those negative emotion areas of the brain, our evolutionary ancient lizard brain that got us to kind of hide and get away, really take over. But when you approach it, when you think about it, what you can achieve, how it's motivating you, when you frame it as what you still have to get to, those areas of the brain that are really important for success take over. And that's it. So it really does, how you think changes how your brain functions, which changes how you perform.
How do you teach people to think differently? Because it's one thing to understand the theory, and it's another thing to like put that into practice. I'm just imagining myself trying to do it now.
Yeah. Well, there's some elements of it, right? You don't have to trick yourself and say, oh, that was really great when it wasn't. But the question is, how do you diagnose what you could have done better? And I know, I'm sure Steve can talk about different elements, but one element that we've studied a lot, and Allison can too, is what you can control, right? So we tend to have negative emotional reactions when we can't control things. And so what are the elements in the future that you can control? And I think that's actually a really important one in terms of reframing, because it's when we don't have agency, as Steve talked about it, that can send us into that negative spiral. But in terms of what you did and how you're going to change it, one or two things you control, we and other researchers have shown that that can be the difference between succeeding the next time and failing.
Compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other things that I look at as well is like, having some sort of plan or approach to handle that inner voice or inner critic. In running, we call it, you have the angel and the devil on your shoulder, and the devil is going to shout really loud once fatigue hits you. So you've better have some coping skills to do that. So what do we mean by coping skills is sometimes it's literally creating space, meaning I'm just going to like create psychological distance. There's actually research that shows when you change how you talk to yourself from first person to second and third person to third person, it changes how you experience that pain. So we'll say change your voice. Sometimes it's as simple as like, reframing your goal. So if you're in that middle of the marathon and you're at mile 19 and you think, well, it hurts a lot and I've still got 7 more miles to go, that's too much for a brain that is processing the fatigue and negativity to handle. So instead, you start to bargain with yourself. You say, I'm going to make it to the next mile and then I'll reconsider. Or I'm going to make it to the next turn and then I'll reconsider. And what happens is that gives you just a little bit of hope where you say, okay, I'll get to this point. And you're just trying to get close enough to where you can smell the finish line. So there's all sorts of these tactics and techniques. But the way I see it, and there was a study in the 1970s on the world's best marathoners that got this, is what they found, the difference between the world's best and the next level down, is the world's best didn't have just like one way to figure out how to handle the pain and fatigue. They had like a dozen different strategies that they'd go through. And those a level down just had a handful, like 1 or 2. And the point is, nothing works all the time, but you better have some tools in your toolkit to go through.
What role does competition play in all this? Like comparing yourself to the next person, the desire to best the competition.
We don't choke in practice. I mean, the point is like comparison is part of the thing. Whether you're looking at youth sports all the way to professional sports, is that like one of the biggest creators of pressure is that comparison piece. Is looking outside and saying, how am I compared to another person? And I would say, and there's some data on this, we feel that more now than ever because we live in a world where there's instant comparison to everything. When I was growing up, I was a pretty good runner and athlete, but that was within, the 25 people in my class. That was my comparison point. If I could have gone online and saw like, oh my gosh, this random dude in Alaska is like kicking my ass, I might not have thought like, hey, I'm pretty good at running. I would have thought, I'm slow at this. I need to find something else. And I think that comparison piece is like, especially nowadays for young folks, is one of the things that pushes us towards, towards that avoidance or that fear of failure that we see so often.
But it's also okay to have those feelings that you're not as good as everyone else, and then you have to reframe it. So I talk a lot about, in my research and even in my leading as president, about the idea of imposter syndrome and this idea that we've tricked everyone to thinking we're good enough to be there. And the research shows that when you have imposter syndrome, that what imposter syndrome predicts is success. First of all, everyone has it. It's not just women. It's not just people who are less represented. Everyone feels like an imposter from time to time. But it actually allows you to get feedback so that you can work and push harder. And the key is to use that as fuel to reframe it in a way that helps you move forward. And as my mom always used to say, like, if you've tricked everyone into thinking you're smart enough to be there, they can't be that smart, right? That's the reframe.
That's clearly what I did today, because I had some imposter syndrome about being up here with you guys, so thank you for saying that. We talked about individual performance, and the second topic we wanted to get to was team performance and how a group of individual performers can get together and find success. So Allison, I want to start with you just because you've had a pretty high-profile team success lately. When you look back on the myriad of experiences that you and your front office and then the team had together leading up to accomplishing this holy grail as a group, were there any surprising or particularly memorable small decisions that ended up paying off when you ultimately win the big trophy?
Yeah, I don't know. I would probably point to doubling down on culture and the alignment across the organization, making sure that we all speak in the same language, whether it's what the coach is delivering to the guys, making sure that each and every one of us in the organization, from those who prepare our food to those who clean the facilities to our business side in their messaging outward, is aligned. For us, if we can get each and every person in the organization to share a piece of what we're trying to build and also embrace the notion that everything that they do impacts our ability to win on and off the court, then we'd be successful. Granted, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, KP, Derek White, all of our guys, Peyton Pritchard, that's the main thing. However, if we can surround the main thing with minimal noise, with the same language from top to bottom, then we give ourselves a shot.
Well, you hit something interesting because it's not always the most talented team that wins every year. There was tons of talent on that team, but clearly you put a lot of mechanisms around the talent to realize a goal that plenty of other talented teams weren't able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I point to this particular example of the NBA because it's the ultimate in basketball. But I've been personally a part of many teams that have had success, that have accomplished the seemingly impossible because we've had, some talent, but also we've had, supreme buy-in to the message. I can point to, the first 16-1 upset in college with, Harvard. I can point to some, games overseas in the EuroLeague where we didn't have the most talent, but we were able to somehow leverage the talent we did have and get some folks to believe that they could do some things that they really, weren't great at. And so, for me, it's about that alignment.
Yeah, talent versus fit, I think, is something that probably permeates. It's not just a sports thing. That must be something, I'd imagine, President Beilock, who became president of Dartmouth in 2023. So that's been a couple years now, too. I would imagine assemble a team, and it's a different type of space, but I would imagine you had to make some decisions about talent versus fit and optimizing a group in a high-pressure environment. Where did you find your biggest challenges and successes as you've assembled your own team?
Yeah, I mean, I came in 2023, and the last year and a half in higher education has been a pressure-filled and highly visible situation. And in fact, now, as my second year and a half, I'm the third longest serving president in the Ivy League, which tells you something. I think Dartmouth has done things really differently, and I'm very proud. But it was assembling a team on the fly. We were building the plane while we were flying it, and I came in, and I had brought a couple of key people with me, but I came into a team of leaders of 20 deans and provosts and folks across my institution. And I always find that the first thing that is so important as you're trying to figure out who those players are is to figure out how to bring efficacy in the team together. And so when I was doing my PhD in sports psychology, I studied under a professor, Deb Feltz, who had made her career looking at this idea of self-efficacy, or your confidence in your ability to achieve something. And one of her biggest findings was that it was the team efficacy that was most predictive rather than the individual efficacy of each member. And so what I have done is building my team over the last year and a half is really focused on where we can have confidence in the team operating together, and also getting people to be honest and open when we're at our board table or at our kind of SWAT table, and then all getting behind where we're going. And that's hard, right? Because it's often very easy to keep your mouth shut and not voice an opinion that's different than your colleagues or even than me. And it goes back to what I talked about in creating these uncomfortable situations, these brave spaces. We try and do that within our senior leadership team, and we hash things out. And then the whole idea is that that gives us more confidence in our ability to operate together as a team.
When you're setting up that space, what are the mechanisms that you put in place to make sure you come out the other end after a conflict still a team?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do is I spend a lot of time talking about when I'm wrong or when someone challenged me and I changed my mind, to really make it commonplace that I want my team to challenge me and question the ultimate decisions. And then after an event or something happens, we'll do a postmortem and figure out, should we have done something different? How do we learn? And really, how do we support each other better? Because we know that you are going to be much more comfortable being uncomfortable when you have those guardrails, when, like in sports, where you know that if something goes wrong, if you fail, you'll get up and do it again. And so creating some of that has been really important.
I'm going to go ahead and go to some of the audience questions. Thank you guys for submitting these. Keep them coming. This can be, I don't know, let me know who this speaks to. Have you seen teams succeed by using positive reinforcement rather than a disciplinarian style? Has the, quote, Ted Lasso effect influenced the way that teams think about motivation and leadership?
I'll just give a very raw example. I don't know. I haven't watched Ted Lasso. Brad always says I got to watch that.
How have you not watched
How
it?
have you not
I don't
watched
know.
Ted Lasso? Then maybe it doesn't matter if she's the winner. I mean, come on.
So no disrespect to cultural differences, or this is just me speaking to my own personal experience in Europe, where playing for many coaches in France, Spain, they would, like, their style of coaching is just like reaming you. I can recall many instances of shooting a three-pointer and just being in a FU match with my coach. But, you know, it worked. We were successful. We won EuroLeague titles together, but just not the best way to communicate. And in contrast here, I've had coaches who are way on the other end of the spectrum. Even now, like, you don't get the best out of someone, I don't think, by being confrontational, especially in the heat of the moment, yelling, especially when there's no psychological safety to say certain things. So I've been a part of both, been successful on both teams, but I much prefer, you know, creating an environment of psychological safety where you can say things in the heat of the moment and you know the person has your best interest at heart, has the team's best interest at heart, and you can navigate those things and deal with, you know, what have you off the court.
And I would also say that there's individual differences. As a leader and a manager, I first learned this when I was overseeing a big lab of about 20 PhD students and postdocs at the University of Chicago. At some point it dawned on me that I have to manage every one of my grad students or postdocs differently, because there are different things that get them excited. For some, it is, you know, saying, okay, I need that paper tomorrow. And for others, if I did the same thing, they would freak out. And so I think it is, as someone, whether a coach or a manager, is figuring out what helps each person on your team and then what that collective team does together. For my team, for example, we can really push hard, but we have a lot of humor that comes out in it as well. And that's really helpful for taking just some of the heat off when we're in the heat of the moment. But there's individual differences for people, your athletes or people in your team, and then for the team dynamic itself. And I think what a good leader does is they're constantly yoking how they act and perform to what that team needs and what those individuals need.
I think that's spot on. I'm reminded, again, in my early career coaching, I had one really good athlete come up to me and said, hey, coach, I like you. We're improving. We're doing a really good job, but I need you to cuss me out in the middle of the race. And in my head, I'm like, okay, this is a little weird. I'm just like some shy runner guy who's coaching at people. But I did it because that's what they needed. And they performed really well. Now, I made sure my athletic director wasn't nearby, but I did it. And I think the individuality, like, we have to give some credence to that. But I think the point is, and I think the parenting research actually gives us a good model here. Because if you look at decades of parenting research, there's one theory that essentially, if you plot parenting on two axes where you have responsiveness, which is like care, how you're responding to their needs, and then you have demandingness on the other axis, which is like expectations, how high expectations you have. If you have both responsiveness and demandingness at a pretty good level, good results happen. If you just have the high expectations with no responsiveness, the results aren't pretty good. They're not good at all. okay? And we're talking from parenting and behaviors and resilience. And I think that applies here as well with some, selective pivoting for some individuals.
Yeah. And I would say it's about the leader demanding and showing the same thing for themselves as other individuals. So my team knows that, sometimes I try and be very clear about whether I need something within an hour, or it can be 2 days late, but I expect a response right away if something is happening, but I also respond right away. I don't let things sit. So I try not to expect from anyone on my team something different than I would show myself.
President Beilock, you went on Adam Grant, who's also in a similar space. You went on a podcast with him and you had a conversation to the effect of leaders sometimes can be the person that started in the mailroom and ended up the CEO, someone that played for a team and ended up the coach, but that doesn't necessarily indicate that they'll be successful at the top of the ladder. The point that you had made was, who did they surround themselves with? What does the research say about who a leader surrounds themselves with?
Yeah, it was funny you asked that because Adam Grant actually was just at Dartmouth yesterday giving a talk as part of our Dartmouth Dialogue series. So I was thinking, how did you know I was just with Adam?
I was not there. I just went on my podcast app this morning.
My superpower of leadership is finding really good people and putting them around me. And then knowing when to ask for help. And as you go up in an organization, you realize that you're not going to have all the answers. And so what I do is I try and surround myself with people who have a lot more knowledge than I do in particular areas. And I go to them to understand a particular issue. And what I also tend to do, especially when I'm going to do something that might be controversial, is I try and go find the people that are going to oppose it the most. So last year, Dartmouth brought back standardized testing as part of our admissions process because the data showed that first it was helpful in finding the best students, but actually counterintuitively we were missing lower income students who were afraid to give us their test scores because they didn't think they were high enough, but when we looked at them in the context of where they went to school, they were amazing and we would have accepted them. And so I looked for the people who were so against standardized testing. By the way, Harvard followed us after that. I went and talked to my faculty who were most against it to understand what they were thinking about, and so that I understood the decisions I was making and why I was making them. And we put the data out there and we talked about our reasoning, but I always go and look for those counterintuitive examples to push me before we make a decision.
Good to know. I would have gotten into Dartmouth too.
If I could give one story on that I think is really important, that's one of my favorite stories is, I was there the first year that Carl Lewis got into coaching. And I remember him at this first conference championship. For track, it's a 2-day event. First day went miserable. So we were sitting at the bar afterwards, commiserating, and Carl's getting fired up because he's the world's greatest athlete ever. And he's like, it's 10:30, call a meeting. We're going to a meeting right now. Bring everyone down. 10:30 at night, they have to compete the next day. Everyone comes down. He pulls out a whiteboard and says, tell me how many points you're going to score because we're going to figure out how we can win this meet. Goes across to every athlete and he says, how many points do you score? These 18 to 22-year-olds are scared shitless and they're just like, I'm going to win. I'm going to win. Every kid says they're going to win. He comes to this freshman kid named Chris, who I was working with, and he said, what place are you going to get? Chris hesitates and he goes, third, maybe second? And Carl goes, why aren't you going to win? And Chris goes, because Drayvon is going to win. And Drayvon was fortunately another athlete on our team, and he goes, okay. He goes, where's Drayvon? Are you going to win? And Chris goes, Drayvon said to tell Carl I'm not coming down. I need to sleep for the next day to perform well. Here's what happened. The team got their ass kicked, but Drayvon won. Now, fortunately, Carl was surrounded by some really good coaches and athletes who he trusted, like Leroy Burrell, again, another world record holder in the 100. And afterwards, they had this get together and they said, hey, that strategy might have worked for you as an athlete, Carl. You needed the hard, here's how you're going to win. It doesn't work for everybody. 3 years later, we're sitting at the national championship, one of those years that we got second or third. But it was a really good performance. And I remember the day of the second day of the meet. Again, first day was a little shaky. We got everyone through, but we didn't look the best. Carl says, guys, we're not having a meeting. We're all going to breakfast. We didn't talk about the meet whatsoever. We had breakfast. Everyone performed really well. We ended up second. And I think that is the key when you look at especially athletes who have done it one way at the highest level. You surround yourself wisely, you update to the people you're in front of, and if you do that, you can perform really well.
Allison, it's a question that I know athletes get asked a ton, so I apologize, but it does connect here. Do you have a favorite coach that you either played for or worked with, and what made them so great, at least from your perspective?
Yeah, that's an easy question. Probably my favorite coach of all time would be Kathy Delaney Smith, our Harvard coach. She was the winningest coach in Ivy League history in any sport, men's or women's. And what made her special was her ability to connect with us on a human level. She taught us all, I think, how to act as if our role were the most important role on the team, regardless of if you were the leading scorer in the country or the 15th to 17th person at the end of the bench, which is incredibly hard to do. She taught us empathy. We somehow found a way to, fit some less than superstar, less than talented, less than athletic Ivy League players, and be competitive in the NCAA tournament. And so I would say her for sure.
What connects now, I'm told, to the data, right? The idea that one size does not fit all when you're leading or coaching. I wanted to go to another question that sort of ties this all together. How does the psychology of winning that athletes use translate to success as an entrepreneur or in business? Are there any mindset shifts or habits that you've observed to carry over particularly well?
Yeah, I would say one is just around failing fast and getting up and trying again. I think athletes know that they're not always going to go into a competition or a game fully peaking or fully prepared, and something might have gone wrong, and then they learn from that and go again. And as entrepreneurs, and what you learn I would say that I've seen for students at my college writ large is it's trying things, figuring out what went wrong, and doing it again, and not feeling like you have to have everything perfect the first time around.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Something that I see in entrepreneurs a lot is, I call it, in athletics, we call it don't just focus on the ceiling, but raising the floor, which is to realize that every day is not going to be a great day. You're not going to have it all flowing and all connecting and have the hot hand. But if you can raise that floor, meaning no matter how I feel, I'm going to show up and be able to play at this level. Or for entrepreneurs, no matter how things look, if I can show up and do this process at that level, it keeps you in the game longer. So you have those shots where when everything feels good, you can take advantage of it.
So to close, a last question from the audience that I think makes a lot of sense. For someone that is more risk averse, someone that is not comfortable with the idea of running towards failure, are there any tactical little pieces of advice that you might give to an individual that isn't comfortable doing all the things we're encouraging them to do?
Do you want to start, Steve? We can go down the line.
Sure. It's like anything. If I asked you to start exercising, would I say go run a marathon? No, I'd say go jog for a couple minutes. So take a bite-sized chunk of something that is a little bit uncomfortable and start with that. That could be, in our modern times, and I struggle with this as well, that simply could be like putting your phone away and like resisting the urge to always check it for like 30 minutes or what have you. That is an uncomfortable thing. Good friend and psychologist Adam Alter told me about an experiment he ran that I just loved, where he would take students and he would say, hey, next time you're in the elevator, I want you to not face the door, but face the back. And the entire point was taking something that was small, that was going to give you a momentary hit of embarrassment, and for you to realize that, like, hey, the world doesn't end when I look like an idiot in the elevator. And I think if you can take something like that and just do it, it's like a muscle. If we can train it just a little bit, you're going to grow that kind of resilience or ability to handle that discomfort muscle.
For sure. Brad referenced a game where they had to, when he was a coach, they had to, play against a formidable opponent. And he asked his team how are they going to attack, the other team, and one of his players was like, how do you eat an elephant? You bite that one bite at a time. You tackle it one bite at a time. And I think too, when you think about any task and any person who's ever achieved anything, it's more about the process than it is the result. It's about taking baby steps. You don't start out doing 25 push-ups. You do five reps, you wait 5 reps, and then you build up the stamina, the resilience to do more the next time. And so when you think about things in a less myopic way, you can, chain some things together to have some success.
And I would just add that it's really hard to do things and approach things that are anxiety provoking or that we don't want to do when we just don't feel good generally. So at Dartmouth, we spend a lot of time talking about health and wellness for our students, because if you don't feel okay, you're not going to want to put yourself in those situations that are uncomfortable. And so thinking about everything you do, from nutrition to sleep to how you're taking care of yourself psychologically, all of that helps with putting yourself in that hard situation. With my 13-year-old who's in the other room and refused to come in and listen to this, so she won't know I'm talking about her. Whenever there's some drama, it's at night, and I say, okay, let's go to bed, let's sleep on it, and if we can worry about this in the morning, right? And the whole point is that if you are more equipped psychologically after you've rested, you will feel better approaching that hard thing.
Well, as someone that fails regularly and will continue to do so, this has been really inspiring. I feel like I'm doing okay now, and I hope you guys do as well. So thank you so much for your time, everybody. Thank you guys for being here.